to the Inner Sanctum. We're going to be a video podcast talking about some of the visual and multimedia exciting releases that have come up throughout history. I'm Julian Gill, host of the kissfaq podcast, and I'm joined by
Andrew
partner
Scambatti.
in crime, Andrew Scambatti. Andrew, how you
Yeah,
doing?
good. It's good to be back talking about Kiss. We've had a long history together on the Kiss FAQ podcast and many, many other podcasts. So it's good to get back and talk about my favorite thing, which is Kiss.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of the show, is to talk about the recorded history of the group, some of which is out there now, circulating. Some of it, well, maybe isn't commonly circulating, but it is available out there. So it's always fun just to look back at the history of some of the shows. Today, we're going to be talking. Well, why don't you introduce this show since it's your pick?
It is my pick, but I just kind of wanted to add a little something. We're focusing on different recordings. We're not going to focus on the studio albums that have been talked about till death. We're going to talk about other recordings, whether they're bonus discs on box sets, they're traded in fan circles, or they're just maybe stuff that some people haven't heard or know it exists. What's interesting about Kiss is the fan base always wants more. Kiss has never been a B-sides band. They've never been. I know, Julian, one of your other favorite bands is Def Leppard. And how many times did they release a single and there's a cool live track on a B-side, or there's a demo on a B-side? Kiss was never a B-side band. So if you wanted more music, you had to go into the Inner Sanctum, the bootlegs. You had to go in and find stuff and trade with other people that had stuff, or go to conventions, or whatever it is. You had to seek out other material from the band if you wanted to hear more than just the albums. So what we wanted to do with this show is we kind of wanted to shed a light on those recordings. We wanted to educate people on maybe something they never heard. We're not going to be playing a ton of it or any of it, but we just want to show what's out there, and we want to talk about other recordings of our favorite band. So I thought the first show would be a great place to start with Kiss's first appearance at Madison Square Garden, February 18th, 1977. And how lucky are we that this show was captured professionally by a camera crew at the Garden back in 77. So I thought Kiss's first show at the Garden, it should be our first show. So here we are talking about that very, very famous show.
All right, New York City! You wanted the best that you got 'em! The hottest band in the land, Kiss!
So cool.
Intro to the show. I mean, Madison Square Garden, and I'm so thrilled that you picked this show to be our first episode, because of course Madison Square Garden is where the final shows that the band.
Final show happened.
Yeah, and
we got to go.
Yeah, and it's a legendary venue. I mean, it's so important as a venue that I flew out in 2019 to see them there, because I was hitting all the big venues because they were doing the Forum. I'm like, I have got to see Kiss in New York City, in their hometown. And Madison Square Garden, I'd never been to a show. So it really is, one of those venues. And this show is one of those majestic moments in history. This is the show in 1977 that all of the band members can agree, and have agreed, was when they finally felt they'd made it, when they headlined at home, because they had not played in New York City since Dressed to Kill. It would have been Beacon Theater, because
Beacon Theater in 75.
Nassau Coliseum on New Year's 75 is outside. So,
well, I mean, it's still Long Island, but I mean, like, if you're talking about New York City, like Manhattan proper, that's right. The Beacon was the last one, and the Beacon was considered their homecoming at the time. And the management of the band felt as though Kiss wasn't popular enough to sell the Garden, so they did 2 nights at the Beacon instead of 1 night at the Garden. How cool would it have been if, I know they had just released, or no, wait, when they played the Beacon, it was March of 75. So Kiss Alive hadn't even been recorded yet when they played it at the Beacon. How cool would it have been if Kiss Alive ended up being the Beacon? I mean, yeah, not as grandiose as playing Cobo Arena, but still, it would have been cool because they would have had 2 nights at the Beacon, or not 2 nights, 2 shows at the Beacon had that been recorded.
Yeah, and they had tried again to get back to the Beacon. There were some tentative dates penciled out in, I think, November 75
Hmm.
for a return to the city, but they held off until
Yep.
they could sell out this venue because of the
Yep.
importance and the press hype. Here they are
Yep.
playing just blocks away from they've been rehearsing 4 years
Yep.
previously.
Yep.
And again, another thing that's important about this show is that I think it's probably one of the best examples of the rock and roll over tour, one that is most ingrained in the brain, because other than that, there's, well, Kobo, January 77, has now
Hmm.
surfaced. But for most of us, this was the one show that we were able to enjoy for many years prior. And until Largo 76 comes out, this is the best we're going
If
to have for the life.
that even exists, who knows?
Well,
Yeah.
since Aerosmith's Largo is also a unicorn that certainly does exist, if the Kiss version of their recording in 76 in Largo looks the same and was shot with the same camera angles as the Aerosmith one, it
Hmm.
would be a badass show, but it would be kind of similar in terms of its feel to
Album.
um, no, to 76 Texas. What was the
Oh,
weird
Houston.
show? Houston
Houston.
76, and some of the strange camera angles that were filmed for that show. That is what the Aerosmith one looks like for 76. So I
Mm.
assume that the cameras would have been very similar for Kiss's show, and the colors
Maybe.
are a bit weird. So
It's interesting to note that we have a lot of shows from the same venues, and for a lot of people that don't know, some of these arenas actually had in-house video crews. That's why you see, like, there's so many bands playing in Largo, at the Capitol Center. There's so many bands that were videoed playing in Houston, Texas at the Summit. These were in Cobo Hall. These were venues that had camera crews there all the time. So there were probably contracts or whatever. The bands always were able to maintain a copy, maybe. But this show is interesting because Madison Square Garden did not have an in-house video crew at this time. So while we were researching this show, we were trying to look and see who actually was hired to record the show. We couldn't find it. So if someone out there knows, please tell us. But at the same time, it's interesting that Kiss understood the importance of the show even back then and hired a camera crew to record the show.
And the camera crew is substantial. You can see from some of the photos, and I don't know whether
Hmm.
the photos circulate, but you can see camera stage left, stage right. There are clearly cameras, higher
Camera
angles.
behind Peter.
Yep. Peter's got the worst camera coverage, by the way, at least
Yes.
frontally. But the rest of the band members, there's cameras off to the sides that are getting good stage shots during the show. So there's a definite number of cameras, and there's clearly a good amount of coordination because apart from the first few shows, and or songs, pardon me, there's pretty good coverage of key elements of the Kiss show. Now, it's certainly
Yeah,
not
I would agree. So I would agree.
it's perfect. It's not perfect, but it is definitely they had a clue about what they were going to be shooting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree with that. It's interesting because you look at some of the other shows or the other appearances that were shot where you had ABC in concert with the Midnight Special, where they probably did camera blocking with the band without makeup. So you tend to miss certain key things. I don't feel as though they miss a ton of key things in this show. But check this out. I thought this would be cool to kind of show. This is my original VHS tape of the concert. I don't know if it came in this clamshell box, but because this was my first show, I wanted to kind of give it the clamshell box. But this is the original VHS tape that I bought way back in 1998. It was my very first bootleg. It probably isn't very good at this point. I wonder if this even still works. But look, I wasn't even kind. I didn't even rewind it. It's all unrewound. So
And
I
there would be
wonder.
absolutely 0 point putting that into a deck now to even play versus some of the copies or some of the other versions that now circulate,
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the previous few years.
yeah. So when did you first get the show? When did you first get the show?
I had it on audio when I
Hmm.
traded tapes when I was still in Britain.
Hmm.
Obviously when I was doing a lot of trading when I was at the University of Canterbury, and then
Hmm.
back home in Scotland. I had it. I didn't have video of it until I moved to America in '98, and then as part of tape trades, I did get it then. So, and it was a crappy, obviously multi-generational VHS,
Oh my
probably
God,
not any
yes.
better than that. And I think I only watched part of it. because at that time it didn't have a hell of a lot of meaning to me. I didn't really have the full context of it because, again, I hadn't kind of learned about the importance of all these moments in history. So
Now, the audio recording that you had, was it an audience recording or was it just a straight rip of the video?
here's a rip of the video.
Rip of the video? Because when my first, so the same day that I bought this, and we'll talk about the show at a later date, I got that on video and I got Largo 79 on CD. But the CD was just a literal straight rip of the video. And it was missing God of Thunder because if they put God of Thunder, it wouldn't fit on one disc.
Yeah, that was
So,
always the problem with the rips from VHS to cassette was the
mm,
flip. You lost
yeah,
stuff, and very few people back then were being, nice and thinking about CDs. CDs were in the future for us. So
CDs were in the future.
yeah,
So a little bit about the history of this show is the band has officially released parts of this show throughout their history. It first came to the first official release of a part of this show was on Kiss Extreme Close Up. Beth was used in Kiss Extreme Close Up, and then the very next, or, excuse me, 2 years later on the Kiss My Ass home video, two tracks from this video ended up on Kiss My Ass. So Kiss has always had this in their archives probably since '77 when it was recorded. But it's interesting to note that when it first hit bootleg circles, only the encores circulated. So only Shout Out Loud, Beth, and Black Diamond were the first things that were traded. This is probably back in the early '90s, maybe in the late '80s. But this was kind of one of those shows that you kind of always saw clips from, and it wasn't until many, many, many years later that you actually got the full show. And it's similar to the Japan '77 show, which we'll cover on a later date. But it's interesting to note that this was one of the shows that they kind of had in their back pocket for such a long time, and we barely ever saw anything of it. And even when they were releasing clips on Exposed in the '80s, they skipped over this show for whatever reason. Who knows? But it wasn't until 1992 and Extreme Close Up when we actually got a clip of this show that was officially released out into
yeah.
the public.
Most of Exposed was like Summit, wasn't it? I can't even remember off the top of my head.
It was Exposed. It was Houston from the Summit, September. I can't remember if it was the first or the second. Then we had something from Australia, 1980, but it wasn't even the full edit. It was the Inner Sanctum of Detroit Rock City. So we had that narration over the end, and the song was cut short. There's a clip from Japan, and then there's a clip from Winterland on Extreme Close Up. And there's also, I think there's a clip of Cobo Hall 76 on there. So the unfortunate part is when you're looking at Kiss and a band with such a rich history as Kiss, when they're looking at two shows that has the same content, they're going to pick the show that looks better. So years down the line, when Kissology Volume 1 came out, and the main show that they chose in the Rock and Roll Overture was Japan '77, because they had the same set list as New York City '77. And we all know Japan '77, shot by NHK, looks phenomenal. Looks phenomenal.
Yeah,
And is
the
a better
audio is properly
representation of it.
mixed as well. So
And
it
so,
makes a big difference in terms of a commercial product. I mean, Kissology used Madison Square Garden in what was a very disappointing manner for a lot of fans at the time. It was a bonus disc. I think it was the mass market bonus disc.
that's correct. This is the mass market bonus disc. For people that don't know, Walmart had Largo 77, which at the time no one had that. Everybody wanted that one. And then Best Buy had Cobo Hall 76 Night 1. When was the last time you watched this version?
I haven't watched that version in years. I got rid of my Kissology bonus discs a long time ago
I don't
because
blame you.
in recent years they've been upgraded.
Yeah.
And again, going all digital and just not having space. I watched it once on the disc. I was kind of bummed out that it was so partial, but as you pointed out, excerpts had been used previously, so it kind of makes sense from that point of view, but it doesn't make any sense from another. But it's also a bonus. I mean, you can flip back and forth on the business and also some of the royalty issues around it and all of that, but it's just so partial, it's pointless, especially when there's so much more out there, and there have been so many remasters and upgrade at 4K 120 FPSs.
Come on. Come on.
You just get to the point of, why am I going to watch this shrinky dink when I could go have a whole cake?
Well, you're right. This unfortunately is probably the worst bonus disc that was in the first collection, because Eagle Eye fans and people that listen closely will notice that the intro to Detroit Rock City is actually, it starts out as Japan 77 and then fades into the proper New York 77. It sounds horrible, and it's clear as day that they use two different audio sources on this. Sounds terrible. It's silly. And for such an important show of the band to be regulated to a bonus disc is silly. This should have been a main release because of how much it meant to the band's history. They're a New York band. This is the first time they played that famous New York City arena. They quote unquote made it, and this is what they give us. Now, here's the good about this. Even though Detroit Rock City is an amalgamation of two different sources, this, at the time, this was actually the best quality version of these songs of this video that had been seen back in 2007, because it was apparent from the Kiss Master, which that's another show for another time. But I noticed that these couple of songs were significantly better quality than the VHS that I had had since 1998. So I knew that there was something better out there. I just didn't. It took a long time for the full show to come out, and we'll get into the songs here in a minute or later on. But when we're talking about the show, the version that we're actually watching, was a great Japanese bootleg site. I think it wasn't CD Japan, but I can't remember the name of the bootleg site that sold this. But this came from Japan, and it was the full show, and it's considered the master series. And then let me tell you, even though there are certain dropouts at certain times, it's still by far the best quality version I've ever seen of this show.
Yeah, I mean, it's imperfect, but it's historic. So you don't worry about imperfections when history. I mean, yeah, there are people who can't handle when there's a dropout in something and they don't care how historically important it is. I mean, let's look at the time that this show is taking place. A week before the Madison Square Garden show, they've won their People's Choice Award for Beth. This little, New England, New York area show grouping starts on the 16th in Hartford with Sammy Hagar opening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole other thing I just want to touch on, is Sammy Hagar flashes the New York audience. He gets so pissed off at them getting so pissed off about him. I actually went back just to try and validate this story about Sammy Hagar. And this is all for Dr. Fuck. This is because I know Dr. Fuck is the biggest closet Sammy Hagar fan that you have ever seen. And I'm sure he's enjoying that new Van Halen video that dropped today from Dallas 91, where the cameraman obviously loves Sammy too. But
I can't wait
Dr. Fuck, we love you. So here is the story about Sammy Hagar. And I did confirm that it did take place at Madison Square Garden from a contemporary newspaper ad.
Here's what happened. The short version of it is, and it was beautiful in its own way, because it gave me drive. It made me angry, and I said, that fucking shit is never going to happen again. So I was asked to do 10 Kiss shows, and it was starting at Madison Square Garden. And I thought, oh, fuck yeah, that'd be great, But unfortunately, the show was already sold out. They didn't even announce me. And all of a sudden, Bill Graham, who was in a limo going from a meeting, was going back to the airport, and he was a dear friend, and he said, he heard on the radio, say, tonight with the Kiss, Sammy Hagar has been added to the show. And he goes, oh, fuck, driver, turn around, go back to Madison Square Garden. I'm going to go see my friend, blah, blah, blah. He walks in right in the middle of the shit, man. I mean, it was like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, boo, And so they didn't really know I was going to be on the show. So when the guy came out to announce it, I'm standing on the side of the stage.
That's interesting that he opened that, because you would have thought that Kiss would have wanted to make it like a package deal of some sort, but I guess it didn't matter at that point because the show had been sold out, and they would start playing Madison Square Garden multiple nights until December 77, which is when you think about that, you think about how fast the band was moving at that point in time. They're on the Rock and Roll Overture February 18th, 77. 10 months later, December 77, it's the Alive 2 tour. And it feels like a lifetime has happened between these two performances when it was only 10 months. You think about all the history that happened in those 10 months. It's amazing. It's incredible.
When this is really the moment, this is Kiss's moment. This is the beginning of that moment to a certain extent. It's launched by Beth, and they're on the up. And that downward is rapidly approaching. I mean, it's really a bummer. They were in the studio with 99X Radio, and that circulates the night before this show. And what struck me listening to that is how similar it actually is to Tom Snyder in 79. It is
Oh,
off the
absolutely.
wall. It is uncontrolled. It is Peter and Ace actually are trying to interact on the same level that they were in 1979, but they are being domineered by Gene and Paul to a certain extent. But all of them are completely off the wall, irreverent, and being rock stars. I mean, it's like, get me to the grave.
Yeah, and I'm going to do a shout out to Ken Mills and Gary Schaller at this point, because the very first episode of the podcast back in 2006, they played that interview. It was the first time I heard it. I mean, think about it this way. I mean, the internet was obviously here to stay by the time 2006 came around, but you still were trading tapes, CDs, and DVDs through the mail. I couldn't go online and just download anything I wanted in a minute. I mean, yes, there was a little bit of Napster in 2000. There were a little bit of bootlegs on Napster, but as far as how it is now, it was much harder to get stuff. So when the podcast was playing a radio interview that I had never heard at that point, I thought it was cool. And how it relates to this show, I think, is really cool. You could hear the excitement of the band in this interview.
And you could also hear the nerves. They were kind of off the wall, pulling their hair out, not really. You can feel a bit of angst.
The other interesting thing that is cool to mention is there's a great Allison Steele show that took place. I think was it Allison's? There's an Allison Steele show that came out around this time called 13 Biographies. But there's also the Burns Media, a rock and roll over with Kiss. I get those two mixed up because they cover the same time period of the band. But one of those interviews, they ask Peter and Paul what they're most excited about, and they say, we're going to be playing Madison Square Garden. So somebody correct me and tell me which one it is, because I can't remember off the top of my head. And it just popped in my memory that they were talking about it. It might be the 13 Biographies by Allison Steele, which is also commonly referred to as Allison's Tea Party, because if you listen to this album, it is brought to you by Lipton Tea, and she makes sure to let you know that during every commercial break.
The general consensus among the group when asked about the high spot in their short but dazzling career thus far was their headlining the show in New York's Madison Square Garden. Paul expresses it rather well.
I'm so excited. There's something to play in your hometown. You know that everybody that you grew up with and all the people that were telling you to become a doctor are all going to be at the Garden.
But if you listen to this honest and touching observation by Peter Criss, and I'm sure it echoes the sentiments of the other three, you kind of get the feeling that they deserve the success they've achieved.
When I was a little boy, I told my mother and my father, I said, Ma, someday I'm going to play Madison Square Garden. I really am. And she called me and she said, not every man could say, a lot of guys could say they're going to build a mountain or climb it or build a house, and not many do it. And I told her I would, and she was so thrilled that I'm actually going to have my dream. So that night's one of my dreams coming true, my biggest.
However, you can hear the excitement of them knowing that the Madison Square Garden show was
Well, let's
imminent.
listen to a clip of what they have said about the Madison Square Garden show in 1977. And some of this audio is culled from the audiobooks for Gene Simmons, Kiss and Makeup, and Paul Stanley. And I'll talk about Peter Criss and the comments he's made about it later.
In May 1976, we sold out Madison Square Garden for 3 nights in a row. This was a big deal for us. When we were starting out, the 4 of us used to sit in our loft at 10 East 23rd Street and say that we had only 10 blocks to go to reach Madison Square Garden, which is on 33rd Street. And now, we were there.
I always wanted a gold record, and I always wanted to play Madison Square Garden. I already had my gold album. On February 18th, 1977, we headlined our first show at the Garden, and it was sold out. It had been 4.5 years since I pulled up in front of the Garden in my cab to drop people off for Elvis's show. I had seen the Stones at Madison Square Garden, forged a ticket for that show, in fact. I'd seen George Harrison's concert for Bangladesh at the Garden. I'd slept outside Macy's in Queens to get tickets for that show. I'd seen Alice Cooper at the Garden. I'd seen Ringling Brothers Circus at the Garden. Madison Square Garden was synonymous with success on a large scale. Playing there was big stuff, really big stuff. I was so anxious before the show that I took half a Valium. The idea that I might be sluggish? No chance. The adrenaline high was so strong on a normal night, and this was homecoming in a sold-out Madison Square Garden. I probably could have taken several whole pills and still have gotten up on stage and then run a marathon in record time. Shows like this were still new. I wasn't yet used to the idea that we were this big. Standing on the diving board is usually scarier than taking the dive, and sure enough, once on stage, I felt exhilarated. That first wave of force coming from people screaming and lights coming on is very powerful. Having multitudes of people focused on you and sending you energy creates an undeniable wave of force. That might sound like some sort of New Age concept, but the feeling is staggering. The entire show carried incredible emotional weight, but by the second song, I was home. I knew my parents were in the audience, and I couldn't help chuckling about it. Yep, that's my boy, the one in 8-inch heels and lipstick jerking off a guitar on stage. But I was proving something to them. They were wrong. This could be done, and I had done it. You see, I am special. And then a bottle came sailing out of the darkness and hit me in the head.
Okay, of course, Gene, who never did drugs, can't tell the difference between May 76 and February 77.
And he says he sold out 3 nights. Yes, you did sell out 3 nights, but it wasn't until December 77.
That's okay, Gene. We love you.
Oh,
and then just to wrap up the other stuff that's going on around this time, the first Marvel comic is under development. The contract for that had been signed, and they were already starting to look at proofs that were coming through of the panels that were going to be published in the middle of the year. And they were also talking about doing advertising and specifically targeting Saturday morning cartoon shows, because it was just a perfect intersection between their music, their comic, and their audience for what it was. And we'll be playing a whole bunch of reviews at the end of the show. We're not going to make you suffer through them until we're done talking about it. But the reviews do mention that the age of the audience is like 15 at this point. So it's dropping, and we all know what happens next. The stage for the Japan tour is being built. So their first Japanese tour, which they're joking about on the 99X interview.
But is it the stage for Japan, or is it just the next stage?
The stage for Japan, the stairs, and some of the elements that would be incorporated into the next stage.
Because there's clear differences between that, and we'll talk about this probably more in depth in the Japanese show. There's no baskets. Was it just not done at this point in time?
Not done
I always just thought that whenever they were talking about this, they say, "Oh, we have a new stage for Japan." I think, and again, I'm just speculating at this point. I think that they knew that the new stage was going to be done, and they needed to test drive it somewhere. I don't think that the stage was created for Japan, but that's just my opinion.
No, it wasn't created for Japan. It was test driven in Japan. What was ready to go was shipped out to Japan because it could be, and because they needed to make sure that they could break it down, set it up, stage it, ship it, get it back, and then use it for the tour that would happen in the middle of the year, starting Halifax,
July.
I believe.
Yeah, July.
So, it makes sense from that perspective. It was also being subsidized by the Japanese label and Casablanca. So, it was a perfect opportunity to switch over from a staging that had been used for essentially 2 tours in slightly
Yes.
differing formats. But the final thing I'll mention for what's going on around the time of this show is the first of the original 3 is certified gold. And that is, of course, Dress to Kill on February
Dressed to
the
Kill.
28th. So just after this show, it really encapsulates an amazing period of history. Homecoming. We've covered the Sammy story. We've covered our personal histories with this bootleg. What version of this show are we going to be discussing today, Andrew?
Well, we mentioned this earlier a little bit. There was a great Japanese website. I think it was in 2022 or 2023. Unfortunately, all these years are like they're all mixed together. There was a Japanese website that apparently was selling the master series of a lot of different shows. I picked up both of the Japanese performances from this website, and I also picked up this show from this website. Initially, I wasn't thinking that there was going to be a huge jump in quality, but to my surprise, there was a large jump in quality. And it always irked me that a bootleg company is putting out superior material than the band of something that they've already put out. I remember when I saw, and I saw these years after they came out, but I remember when I had Exposed, Extreme Close Up, Kiss My Ass. I had these videos, and you got representations of little nuggets. Oh, and Confidential. You got representations of little nuggets of the band's history. And we were all kind of okay with that at that point. And then bootlegs were coming out. And at the time, the bootlegs that were coming out weren't superior to the clips that the band was releasing. Yes, the bootlegs were the full shows, but still, the band still had the best quality at that time. And then the band starts releasing the Kissology series. And then I don't know what happened. Whatever was on Exposed was far superior than whatever ended up on Kissology. And then as we start releasing stuff, time and time and time and time and again, it appears that the quality gets less and less and less and less and less. So when a supposed master version of this show was available to purchase, even though it was from an unofficial website, we bought it and we enjoyed the hell out of it.
Yeah, and it hasn't been touched and retouched and molested. And again, what I find with looking at this show, listening to it, is it dials back a lot of the things that fans and pseudo professionals, and I include myself in that. I'm not dissing anyone for their efforts to make things sound and look better. We all kind of do it to a certain extent, even if we only have a graphic EQ attached to our stereo. So it's no real sin. This really dials it back, and that's the kind of the same ethos now that makes it more real, more natural, more just take the additives out. It is what it is, and you're starting from a clearer baseline again in experiencing the show. And it was almost like experiencing it again for the first time. Not only is it complete, we played the intro earlier, all the way through, and yes, it has some glitches, but as a listening experience, wow, it was fun.
It was like seeing it again for the first time. I remember when I got the VHS tape, and first of all, I was uneducated at the time. It was 1998, so I was 14 years old or 13 years old. I thought that it was Madison Square Garden 77 because to me 77 meant Love Gun. I didn't realize it was Rock and Roll Over. And then I remember, they played God of Thunder, then they played Rock and Roll Night. I go, what are they going to play now? I go, what are they going to play now? And then they play Shout Out Loud. I go, what are they going to play now? And they played Beth. I go, they're not closing the show with Beth. And they played Black Diamond. Like I didn't know the set list at the time. I'd only seen Kiss on the reunion tour by the time that I bought this. So it was such a cool experience to watch this and not really know what was going to happen. And Even though I had seen Kiss 2 years prior, or almost 2 years prior in '96, I had really bad seats, so I wasn't able to experience like some of the key moments of the show. So seeing Gene spit blood here in '77, I thought was so cool. And I just it watching this master version of this disc, it was cool. It took me back to watching it. I vividly remember I had a twin bed, all the kids had a twin bed, and then I had a little 13-inch TV on top of my dresser, and that's the first time I saw this one, this little 13-inch TV. And I just remember just looking up, and now it's just like, wow, it's Kiss. And I got that same feeling when I watched this version of the show again.
Yeah, and that was kind of my response to this show. It made me
Mhm.
tingle, having now experienced New York City, Madison Square
Mhm.
Garden shows.
Mhm.
I haven't been blessed to see enough shows, but I have seen 3 at Madison Square Garden, so I'll happily take that for. I don't care if you've seen 400 Kiss shows, 200 Kiss shows. I got to see my 3 at Madison Square Garden and the LA Forum, so I'm happy. All right. I just want to contrast the comments from Gene and Paul about the importance of this show by reading an excerpt from Peter Criss's book
Mhm.
about what he felt about these shows.
And we're reading the excerpt from Peter's book because people may not know. Peter Criss did not lend his voice to the audiobook, which is why we're not using the audiobook.
Yeah.
He should
Because,
have, but he didn't. Yeah.
the day of the show, all 4 of us were scared shitless. It hit us when we walked backstage and saw all those photos of Sinatra and Ali. This was the world's greatest arena. I think I threw up twice before the show. Paul was climbing the walls. You could cut the energy with a knife. And it's a really sad opposite of the coin a few nights later when Peter crashes a car, a show is delayed. Ace had a DUI actually very soon after that had to be taken care of. That's kind of the first weaknesses truly appearing in the
Mhm.
good ship Kiss, that they've
Mhm.
had this really high moment, an amazing moment, but they're already kind of broken inside.
Yeah.
And that
The
makes me very
cracks are starting
sad.
to form.
Yeah. So they're all nervous. They kind of go on stage. The show. Why don't we talk about it?
The band has spoken about this show frequently in the band's history, and they always claim that they thought the show was sloppy, they thought the show was rushed, they thought the show lacked professionalism, and they thought the show showed the band as nervous individuals. Out of all the times I've watched this show, whether it had been in my younger years or as I'm older now and more educated in music, I never thought that. I thought the band came on stage with such energy, and I didn't feel that this was rushed more than Kiss rushed live. And what I mean by that is you listen to the studio records, the band's playing at one tempo, then obviously they're going to play faster live. I didn't think this was Love Gun tempos because the band was playing super fast on the Love Gun tour. I think the band sounded good at this show. I really do. I think they sounded better at Cobo Hall, 2 weeks earlier, but that's another story. But I thought the band sounded good. I thought when they started Detroit Rock City, I thought that you felt a level of excitement, not nervousness, not sloppiness. I thought the band sounded good.
I disagree. I think they sound rough.
Really,
Yeah,
really.
and I think visually the cameras have no idea what they're doing at this moment. It's almost like they were caught off guard at the start of the show. I think it is rough musically. Um, I mean, cameras are focusing on waists. Uh, you know,
Yeah. Okay. Some of those pick cams
others
are out of
on.
focus. I'll give you
Yeah,
that.
the continuity is kind of lacking. The band is nervous as shit. You can tell that it's not Knoxville '79 speed. Um,
Oh my
wh-
god.
yeah, where that show starts off at you know acid level,
Oh my god.
but
So fast.
then again, you have to take into account the moment. You just said Cobo Hall 2 weeks earlier is a completely different beast, and you're absolutely right because they've been playing it in Detroit for years. They
Hmm.
hadn't come home to New York City. Again, you
They
have
hadn't
all
come
that
home.
emotional energy. Peter has described Paul as climbing the walls, him puking, and then they're on
Hmm.
stage in front of that crowd, in front of their families, in front of their peers. There were a
Hmm.
lot of people in that audience who had played in bands with those guys pre-Kiss. There were
That's
the
right.
press. The press was just waiting. The press
Waiting
was
for them to mess
never
up.
yeah, the press was never a fan. And again, you'll hear that in some of the reviews get a bit
Mhm.
snarky about them. So no wonder it's not a train wreck. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that it's a little bit rough. And you know what? Considering the pressure that they must have been on, there have been times in my life that I've had to go on camera or in person under a lot of pressure. They did a hell of a
Mhm.
lot better job than I've ever done under that pressure.
Well, the other thing too that I want to mention is, later on in the show, Ace breaks a string during Shout It Out Loud, and he kind of botches the solo. But maybe I'm just viewing this show through rose-colored glasses because it was literally my introduction into the next level of Kiss fandom, which is those unofficial recordings that I talked about earlier. Maybe I'll never be able to look at this show unbiased. It's very possible because anytime it's on, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the shit, man. This is it. This- Every time it comes on, every time I'll stop what I've seen this show more times than any other bootleg I've ever owned in my entire life. That includes the bootlegs that I made, and sometimes I spend a year on those. I've watched Madison Square Garden 77
Yeah. And
more.
I don't get a lot of opportunities to actually sit and fixate on a watching experience or listening to
Hmm.
something.
Hmm.
And obviously, I'm doing it for a purpose so that we can talk about it afterwards. But I was just dragged in. I'm looking at their faces. I'm watching their emotions as they're playing, and I see
Hmm.
what they're feeling. And it's a very powerful moment. So, yeah, it's rough musically, but what Kiss show hasn't been rough musically? They're running about the stage with all this gear on, knocking their instruments all over the place. They've never been yes on stage. They're not
That's
looking
true.
for perfection. They're not presenting perfection. They're presenting a moment. They're presenting an emotion. And those emotions come across in Detroit Rock City because what a fantastic opening track it is anyway.
They're the only time they were uh, preaching perfection musically was during MTV Unplugged. That was it. Um, again, we've talked about that this is the this they we got to a point in the band's history where I don't think the set lists have become stagnant just yet, but basically over a large portion of the Rock and Roll Over tour, the set list is exactly the same. We'll talk later on about the Rock and Roll Over rehearsal tape because that shows a glimpse of what the set list could have been. It shows other songs that have been played. But by the time you get into February 77 and even January 77, it's the exact same set. It's the exact same set list in Detroit as it is in New York, as it is, 2 months later in Japan. So they've dialed in the set list. So it's your Detroit, it's your Take Me, it's your Let Me Go Rock and Roll, your Ladies Room. There's nothing out of the ordinary on this show. And what was funny to me about this, because I didn't know anything, um, I didn't know anything that there was going to be different. That the song's going to be the same. I thought, man, if I get the Japanese show, maybe they'll play "Calling Dr. Love." I didn't know. I didn't know any better at that point. But this is your standard rock and roll over tour set list.
And
Um,
that's what makes it a good representation to talk about. I mean, you don't have the quality of show available to talk about some of the December 76 shows where Hard Luck Woman's in
right?
the set. And as you mentioned, obviously the rehearsal tapes are a completely different matter as well. But
Yeah,
here it's cookie cutter to a certain extent. But back then people didn't have the internet. People weren't trading tapes with immediacy. So no one knew this was the same set.
that's
So
right.
that's
That's right.
only in hindsight after we've heard hundreds of shows or maybe
Mhm.
thousands hearing these things over and over again that it all becomes, I call it cookie cutter. That sounds negative. That's not. These are
Yeah,
highly choreographed as well. In the Kiss show, there's flames, there's elements of the show that have to happen, there's lighting, so they don't have the same capabilities to be flipping in songs and in and out of the set like an Aerosmith or a Nugent. It
or
just
Foo
is what it is.
Fighters. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a different thing because everything has to be carefully crafted, and I would never say that they're lazy because they played a lot of these songs live, and I've seen songs performed that are rare songs, and I've seen the audience go limp.
Yeah.
They see that night
Yeah.
after night. They're doing Hard Luck Woman or say Love 'Em and Leave 'Em, and they're not seeing any reaction out of the audience. And they throw in Take Me, which is the second song that we'll talk about, and they see a
Mhm.
reaction. People react. They're feeding off the audience. They always have. So they need to get
It,
their rewards.
it's so funny because you mentioned Take Me. People complained on the Kiss reunion tour in '96 that they played the same set list. But if you watch if you look at the history of that reunion tour, they did mix it up quite a bit, especially from what they were doing at that point in time in the history of the band. And I remember, October '96, them throwing in "Take Me," and the audience like sat down. So, what do you want from them? I mean, "Take Me" was the staple second song at this point, and it was obviously from the new album. It was the first new song in the set list, being second. So, for a band like this that had only been on the scene for 3, maybe 4 years, a brand new song. Well, first of all, Detroit Rock City is still relatively new. It's not even a year old at this point, and it was already a bona fide hit among Kiss fans. And then you have a song that's not even a year old, and your very next song is off of your brand new album. That's your second song. That takes balls. It really, really does. Because typically, and especially nowadays, you have bands that come out and they'll play 2 or 3 big hits, and then they'll play the new song. So, um, those first out of those first 4 songs, Detroit, Take Me, Let Me Go, Rock and Roll, Ladies Room, half of those songs are from the brand new album, Rock and Roll Over. That lets you know how strong the material was of the band at this point.
Yeah, and it's a very finely crafted set list. Take Me, you immediately sense them settling as well. They've gotten
Mhm.
through the opening of the show. The kind of energy ebbs
Mm.
slightly in that their fingernails aren't all extended like an angry cat. Paul's settling down. Once Paul's settled down, he's leading them to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Uh, you
Yeah,
know,
nobody fell down the steps as they were walking down the steps, so they're good.
yep. Camera crew is settling down now. Everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. Everyone's gotten through the opening of the show, and you really get a sense of the audience. I just hearing the firecrackers and
Mhm.
all of that. Again, when you read the reviews, you're going to get to listen to them later, and you hear about the fireworks and the energy in the audience and some of those '70s crowds. You would have been ducking cherry bombs at concerts in the
Yes.
'70s, and all sorts of crap going on. It must have been an amazing thing to hear those pops, those crackles all going off. And Paul, Paul is Paul. Paul is the captain of the ship because
He's the
he
front man.
speaks. Yeah, he's the front man. He's in control. He's driving that show. Let Me Go Rock and Roll. They hit
Um,
that, and that's where everything is firing. My notes on this song and the performance are just all cylinders firing. What do you think?
yeah, I don't like this song. I've never liked this song. You know, whenever even anytime they brought it back, I always thought it was the snoozing part. I do appreciate that starting on the Destroyer tour, they kind of got rid of the whole end section of the jam. I do appreciate that, but I never I thought there were so many other cool Gene songs to do than Let Me Go Rock and Roll. But again, here's our first glimpse of choreography. They're doing their dance there. So I get while it's in. I get why it's in, and it was probably a fun song for them. But this was always my least favorite song. Always.
It's just boogie rock. It's just standard out of the can '70s boogie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, I'm yawning. That's. Let me go rock and roll, man. Take it. I
Uh,
listen when they dropped that off the end of the road tour. I was happy.
oh, shame on you, ladies'
Mm.
room. Breakneck,
Love it.
the pace,
Love
um,
it.
and what I love about it is the cameras focus in on Peter,
Yeah.
and you see a Catman. Peter Criss is emotional. Peter Criss is
Yeah.
living that moment, and you can see of all of them, he expresses the emotion of absolutely savoring the moment of playing the garden more so than the other guys who are very busy up front with their stuff. Peter gets to show that emotion of the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree, and I think it's one of the tightest songs throughout the night is Ladies Room. It's one of my favorites. It's one of those songs that was like the biggest non-hit hit why hasn't this song appeared since they put the makeup back on? I know they did it like 1 or 2 nights on the Kiss cruise, but why wasn't that in the set? That was a great song. I would have taken that over Watching You. So, missed opportunity. This song should have been played more, my opinion. Then what do we got after Ladies Room? We go into Firehouse.
Ugh.
And well, it's funny to me. There's Firehouse has been the 5th song so many times in the Kiss set list. I didn't think The Flame was captured as good as it could have been captured. We're starting to get to a point here now where I needed an additional camera that would have caught the whole stage. You only really get glimpses of the whole stage. And I wanted to see more of the whole production, because there was still a production at this point. You have Gene's castle, you have Ace's little moon landing over there. You don't really see the big production. So I thought Firehouse was good. I prefer it on the Rock and Roll Overture versus how fast it was in the Love Gun tour. But it's interesting to think that looking down at the set list and looking down at everything, aside from Nothing to Lose, this is the only song from the first album that survived.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to a certain extent, but
Mm-hmm.
I found the intro pretty awkward. It just didn't seem to quite gel. But Paul's loose enough at this point that he finally starts throwing pics at the audience. So you
Yeah.
get to see more of the production from some of the photos that, again, I don't know if they circulate or not, but from the photos, you get to see more of it. And you can actually see the elements that survive from the previous year much better. What I do wish we could see is, as you mentioned, kind of a distance shot of the whole production. I want to
Yeah.
know, where were those video screens? Because that was the purpose of having all these cameras in-house, was to show it so that people could see. They weren't filming this for posterity.
Are you sure? I don't believe that this is an in-house crew.
No, they were filming it for in-house screening. According to the reviews, there were in-house
Okay.
screens displaying the show, just like at Kobo.
So let's pretend that that's factual, or let's take that as a fact.
I read it on the internet.
It must be true. If that is true, and there were screens throughout the garden, and I'm not talking about, there could have been large screens on either side of the stage, but Madison Square Garden had suites, so there could have been screens in there, closed caption television screens. Does that mean that the December 77 shows could have been shot too? Is that what that means?
Well,
Or the July 79 ones? How cool would that be?
do we have enough photographic evidence in which to see any of those possible cameras? Because they are clearly visible in the February 77 photos that do exist. And again, you have to look in the forthcoming Ace book, and hopefully those pictures make the cut. I mean, it's really interesting to kind of suggest that there may be more.
There's a great book out that was put up by Kiss Army Spain, where it goes over all these Madison Square Garden appearances, every single one of their Madison Square Garden appearances. So I'm just flipping through. It's funny, that advertisement you just showed is the first one I flipped to here. But there's a lot of pictures from the February show. And you're right. You're looking at these pictures, and you can clearly see some of these pictures, the cameras that are there. You can clearly see them. 100% you could see. I'm trying to get to the the December 77 shows. Yeah, so if these, I believe all of these pictures are legitimately from December 77. It's so weird. They seem like everything seems so much more polished by the Alive 2 tour. So much more.
Yeah, and maybe they didn't need them. Maybe there, again, if you've got memoranda or other information about this, we want to learn just as much as talking about these shows. If you know something that we don't, do chime in wherever you're watching this in order to share what you know. Was this being filmed, and what was the purpose for it being filmed, other than to be shown on screens as suggested in newspaper reviews of the show? Because that seems like an awful lot of effort to be going to. Those cameras, well, obviously it was the 70s, so they weren't quite what modern technology is. Looked like it was archival.
Well, so I'm looking at some photos here, and these photos, they came from Rock Scene magazine, May of 1978. Photos were shot by Bob Gruen. There's a shot of the side of the stage where it's of Paul. And again, it's black and white. So I'm doing the best I can looking at these. I don't see any cameras.
That's for December.
December 77. Yes.
Yeah.
And I believe, yeah, so check your issues. There's a website you can go to look at all of the issues of Rock Scene. This is May of 1977. The cover is that. So, and I'm gonna, just like I used to do on another popular Kiss podcast that I used to be on and I helped create. Anytime we would look at something and I would find out something, I'm like, ooh, I got to go on eBay and I got to buy that because that's what I do. That's what I do. So,
All right.
So you're looking at pictures of December 7th. I don't see any caps. Anyway, continuing on with this show, we get
Making
down
Love.
to like the meat and potatoes of the set, where Making Love. This is another new track off the album, and it's so weird to think about. So we're not even halfway through the set list, and we already have 3 brand new songs off the new album that had just come out. Take Me, Ladies Room, now Making Love. And then Making Love is followed by my favorite track, I Want You. So many new songs so soon in the set list. It's bizarre because that would never happen again on any Kiss tour, never.
No, but what a great audience reaction section I Want You has.
Yes.
Again, you can just imagine as Paul as frontman, he was a consummate professional in that role. But to have that audience, his hometown audience, kind of in his hand, must have been a validation and vindication of anyone who ever doubted him.
Yeah.
What an amazing moment. It must have been particularly for him as master of ceremonies.
Yeah, I agree. I'm glad you said master of ceremonies because there are some people that say MC, which is supposed to be M.C. period. But now they actually write out the word MC. Regardless, it's English language. Regardless, we move along to Cold Gin, and you can clearly see that Ace has switched to the Smoker, which appears to be a Les Paul Jr. at this point in time because it absolutely is smaller than the Les Paul that he was using in the previous song. And this would be the last appearance of Cold Gin for many tours. They wouldn't do it on the Love Gun tour. They wouldn't do it on the Alive 2 tour. They wouldn't do it on the Dynasty tour. It would come back, unmasked when Eric Carr joined the band. But this is the final tour that Cold Gin was on, and I thought this was, this should have been. It certainly was a staple throughout the '80s, but they decided to drop it for a little while. What do you think of this track?
This song in particular is the moment in the show. This is the kitchen sink song. Gina's leaping. Ace is on fire. Paul is violencing, doing his Townsend windmills. And on the video, the 70s FX overlays are just so kitsched and so dated that they're absolutely wonderful. It's all there. It's a shame there's a tape fault on the video, but God, it is everything encapsulated in one song that a Kiss show kind of represents.
You mentioned the tape glitch, which I want to talk about here because there are tape glitches in Cold Gin, tape glitches in Do You Love Me, and tape glitches in Nothing to Lose. So the only thing that I didn't do in preparation for this show is there are tape glitches during Do You Love Me. I don't believe there are tape glitches in Do You Love Me on Kiss My Ass. Somebody A-B that for me and tell me and get back to me on that. I mentioned that because there might be other versions of this show out there, as silly as it might be.
You think there might be more than one U-matic tape or whatever the format was in 77? I think you could probably bet your life on it.
I do. I believe that there's probably a U-matic tape version. There's probably a 2-inch tape version. There's probably a beta version, which would be the poorest quality of all of those that we talked about. Certainly the beta was higher quality than VHS. But I truly believe that there are other copies out there, and maybe people don't even know that they have those. They just see, oh, New York 77, that everybody's got that. So I believe that there are others. Now, here's the other thing that I have to do too, and shame on me for not doing this. There's a tape glitch in Nothing to Lose, and I want to match it up to the tape glitch, if there is a tape glitch on the Kissology version. This would be interesting. This is the minutia stuff that this show was built on. Looking at, oh my God, this has a glitch and this one doesn't, but it's the same song. So it's interesting to note that there possibly may be other versions of this show out there.
And that's what Kiss audio and video geeks do. They
That's what we
look
do.
for a song, a demo that's slightly better, or at least to their ears, or through wave analysis, spectral analysis, than a previous version. They're looking for a video that doesn't have a glitch here, that, to in search of the very best. You wanted the best? We're still looking for it. It really is the mantra. Do You Love Me actually made me think, and I wrote down while watching this, do I need the avatars? I'm watching Do You Love Me, Madison Square Garden 77. Do I need some fake concoction of Kiss, or do I
No.
want to slam in a video, however I watch it, to relive that moment in time rather than some computer-generated one? And Kiss is eternal. I can watch this 77 show, and I don't need it to be AI'd. I'm smiling through this, listening to
Me
it,
too.
watching it, experiencing it.
Me too.
That's going to make what the avatars is a very hard sell for me, when we have this wonderful body of work that is contemporaneous, that is in essence untouched, unsullied, and not fake in any way.
That's why I believe that the focus should have been on the archive, not the avatars. Putting this out, this full concert on whatever 4K, blue, whatever disc you want to put out, putting this out, I think would have gotten a more positive reaction than the avatars did. That's my opinion. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. We're pick up back at God of Thunder. We get to see they're still using the tower.
Well, don't you dare forget Nothing to Lose.
Well, I mentioned about the glitches that I wanted to check. So yeah, Nothing to Lose is great, and this is another song that should have never have left the set list. And I misspoke earlier on because I guess I was blind. Firehouse, Cold Gin, Nothing to Lose, and Black Diamond are the surviving tracks of the first album. So sorry. As soon as I looked down the set, I was like, oh, what was I talking about? So there's 4 tracks on the first record still. But this is Peter's first lead vocal of the night. Nothing to Lose. That was his moment.
And his enthusiasm is absolutely on display in that moment. That crescendo at the end of the song. Wow.
Yeah. It's good. And then again, we get to God of Thunder. We get to see Gene spit blood. And then we get to hear Peter kind of take center stage again during the drum solo. What I always found humorous about this, and I think there's the same glitch in Houston 77, when Gene comes back to sing the final verse of God of Thunder, can't hear his mic, and it sounds like they were trying to do the monster voice or doing some kind of effect, and whatever reason, the mix of his voice just didn't end up in the mains. So I thought that was always humorous that you can't hear him sing the final verse of God of Thunder.
I always find it humorous to think that this really is the extent of Gene Simmons' acting skills. The beginning of God of Thunder, the blood-spitting fury, really is as good as he gets as an actor. Absolutely perfection.
No. He was great in Runaway. I love that movie.
No.
That movie. Listen, that movie is still good. Runaway. That movie's still good. I got a lot of enjoyment out of Runaway. All right, so now we get to Rock and Roll All Night. Paul smashes the guitar. A lot of rapid camera changes at the end of this song, which I thought was kind of odd, because maybe the camera didn't know where to go. But this was the Rock and Roll National Anthem. I thought when I saw this song the first time I watched this video, I thought it was over after this.
Did you?
I did. I was uneducated, as I mentioned.
Yeah, but what a great version it is if it was over. Because, again, the anthem in the home city.
I agree. And then we have our encore break, and we come back in with Shout It Out Loud. I really like Paul's intro on this, where something's really become apparent after a while, and that's that. There ain't no place like home in New York City. You're our home, and they play Shout It Out Loud. I thought that was cool. As I mentioned earlier, Ace breaks a string and continues on with the solo as best as he can.
And then Beth.
Let's all take a trip to the Beth room.
Let's all think about Peter Criss performing Beth, the song that elevated Kiss to superstardom.
That's right.
After seeing Sinatra on the walls of the temple, going out there on stage, and what strikes me
essentially
the most
being
about
Frank
that,
Sinatra.
Yeah, for a moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
he was on stage. He was a solo act on Madison Square Garden, singing a hit single to his family and friends in his hometown. And again, the emotion of it, watching him get the hell off stage at the end of the song as well. I mean, you could see he needed to move and couldn't get caught up in the moment. It's again, I know people are jaded by the song, but when you just sit and watch and fixate on it and think about the moment for a second, it really hits you, or it hits me.
Yeah.
And that's all I care about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great performance of it. I'll let the camera guy slide for it being out of focus almost the entire first verse. I'll let that slide. But it's interesting to see. You almost wonder, did they try this with the whole band playing acoustic? What they would have done with Eric, 2 decades later, 3 decades later. You wonder if they tried that before they started doing this. And it's interesting to note that even though they decided to go with an orchestra tape on this one, they trimmed that whole middle section down in order to focus on Peter's voice more. So it would be interesting to me. I would want to see additional rehearsals to see if the plan was to play acoustic initially, and then they decided to go the orchestra tape.
My hope that if it had ever been said to Peter in, late 76 as they started rehearsals for this tour, Peter, we'd like to do Beth acoustically, that his response would have been, "Fuck you, you laughed at me."
Yeah, that probably would have been his response. And it's also interesting to note, because this also happened with Dr. Love. There was no Beth on the Destroyer tour. Beth didn't come in until the Rock and Roll Over tour. I thought that was
Yeah,
interesting.
because it hadn't hit until August. So that this was the first opportunity for it to be added in. And again, what a great solo spot. I mean, Gene gets a solo spot, Peter gets a solo spot, Ace gets his solo spot, and it really did make them all equals as band members at this stage, that they
Well,
all had that focus.
Well, I have words about that later on that we'll talk about at a later show. But Paul gets a spot here next with Black Diamond, and it really is the ultimate ending of a Kiss show. I do wish the lighting was a little bit better, because I do want to see more of that, of the drums elevating. I do want to see more of that. And it's unfortunate that the lighting isn't what we became used to. So, but it is still a grand finale of the show. And my opinion, I always think Black Diamond should finish the show, not Rock and Roll at Night. Should be Black Diamond.
No, Black Diamond is it. That is the greatest way to end a show possible when it comes to Kiss. There is nothing else.
I also don't like what they started doing recently. I mean, when I say recent, I say maybe in the last 20 years. I don't like how they even started on the reunion tour, where before the lights went out, everything went up and then it came down before the lights went out. I wanted to stay up there, lights go out, and then when lights come back on, then I didn't want to see it come back, because it's very, very it's not very cool to see it go. It's cool to see it go up, and then if I'm watching it come back down with the lights are on, I'm like, well, that's not cool. It's coming back down. I want to stay up there. They're supposed to just jump off those things. So.
All right, let's wrap up our thoughts on this show, because we will talk about what they said about this show, and what's going to follow is about 12 minutes of narrated newspaper reviews that are contemporaneous from the trade magazines. But Andrew, surmise the show.
Like I said before, I love this show. I'm never going to be able to look at this show without rose-colored glasses. I'm always going to love this show. I'm always going to love this show. And I'll probably watch it tonight again.
No, I'm really glad to had a reason to revisit and focus in on a show for a moment. I think the best way to end this show is actually to let the band do it. Is
I
there
agree.
any final words that you want to have before I play a little clip from
N-
Kiss?
No, I just hope that the people that have watched this and commented, what shows do you want to see us talk about? This is a new way that we're approaching unofficial or added Kiss recordings. What do you want to hear us talk about? What we what this podcast wants to do is we want to research the time period of any said recording and talk about it and do a deep dive. What was going on in History? What version of the show is the one that we want you guys to see? And and hopefully, as a fan, hopefully you can learn something new. And if you can't learn something new, maybe you watch something that you haven't watched in a while.
Or you'll be chiming in with comments that make us think and learn, because that's
Yeah.
what it is about as Kiss fans. No one knows it.
Yeah.
Everyone is just always learning, reevaluating, reconsidering, adding new information into the mix. No one is a guru. And I always like to joke that we're not the Masons, we're Kiss fans. There are no levels. We're all there to learn from each other and enjoy stuff. Whether we're enjoying it together or not is
Mhm.
beside the point.
So let's let Kiss take it away.
Here we go. Kiss with the final word. Thanks for joining us.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling on the way. Bobby. See you tomorrow night. All right. Come on, night, Madison Square Garden, and again, Monday night, Nassau Coliseum. Kiss, thank you, Gene, Paul, Peter, and Ace, and I think I've never met such nice people, man, and I'm proud that you came by and said hello to me. Thanks a lot, Terry.
Thank you, Terry, my man.
That also is me.
The Daily News Review. Since coming out of Queens in 1973, they have evolved into a national super hot act. They sold out Madison Square Garden Friday night, and they probably will do the same at Nassau Coliseum tonight. It's been said you can't quarrel with success, but if you wanted to quarrel, you could say that their power lies not only in age, but also in staged theatrics like fog, fire, and fake blood, in overwhelming repetitive guitar chords, and in shouted lyrics like, "Get down, everybody's gonna leave their seat." For instance, a song like Do You Love Me, which has some cynical things to say about what money and fame can buy, never hits its audience much past the title line, and an unusual digression into a ballad, The Wistful Beth, delivered quietly solo by Kiss's lead vocalist, had to compete with the Army's whistles of approval. The fact the audience was willing to wait 1 hour without catcalls for Kiss's entrance shows something of the loyalty their basic heavy sound has inspired. The Billboard Review. The Kiss Army, at least 18,000 of them, packed the Garden for the group's homecoming concert February the 18th, climaxing its successful tour of the Heartland. The intense excitement that ripples through the audience prior to the group's entrance is a rare quality these days, but it seems to have more to do with Kiss's style than the group's musical expertise. Kiss appeals to the dark side of the teenage persona, incorporating elements of danger into its act, and then laughing good-naturedly when the dangers are revealed as more theatrical devices. This catharsis is highly valued. Kiss played the nearby Nassau Coliseum the next night to nearly as many fans. It's not good music, not by a long shot. It's psychodrama, pure and simple, but it's as effective as thunder and lightning for taking the edge off teen boredom. In fact, the group's song, God of Thunder, describes the process accurately. These guys know what they're doing, from piping The Who's Teenage Wasteland over the PA during intermission to their fire-breathing antics. The price of a ticket gets the holder nearly 70 minutes, 15 songs drawn from Kiss's 6-album repertoire, plenty of thunder and fireworks, and thanks to giant screen television, a chance to see under all the makeup. Kiss is just another bunch of guys from the neighborhood who like to rock and roll. The Variety Review. Explosions and flames on stage and in the SRO crowd sparked a high-decibel rock concert by Kiss Friday, the first ever for the local quartet at Madison Square Garden. Probably sparked by Kiss's stage antics, there were more fireworks from sparklers to cherry bombs in the audience than usual. Also, there were many fire-eating youths, apparently trying to emulate the group's bass guitarist, Gene Simmons, who only did the bit once during the evening. Kiss, in their unusual ghoulish makeup, dished out rock and roll for about 75 minutes. Sound was fuzzy and unclear at times, but the excitement level was consistently high. Youths frequently sang along with Simmons, rhythm guitarist Paul Stanley, and the others. The poor sound especially hampered lead guitarist Ace Frehley's long solo. Peter Criss, strong on drums, completed the combo. The New York Times Review. Stumbling in the darkness into a Kiss concert, as this well-meaning observer did Friday at Madison Square Garden, might lead one directly to dire meditations on the decline of Western civilization. How else, after all, are we to interpret an entertainment that highlights a bass player spitting blood atop a tower, surrounded by swirls of smoke and bathed in bilious green light, all the while dressed in a black leather and silver costume that makes him look like a diabolical armadillo? And the sight of this apparition evoking a dull, throaty roar of appreciation from the sold-out house, the cries of the multitude overlaid with a treble piping of a large prepubescent minority, it was difficult to dismiss Kiss as altogether outrageous. However, having just come from the Metropolitan Opera, where Leonie Reiseneck as Salome had most convincingly mimed the act of kissing the lips and caressing the severed head of a saint she had ordered killed out of necrophiliac lust. This confection of Oscar Wilde and Richard Strauss not only dates back 72 years, but is appreciably creepier than anything Kiss managed. Salome is also a good deal more decadent in the sense that a vastly more sophisticated technique is bent to the service of lurid exploitation. So with Kiss's menace diffused and their musical impact muted by a thin and distorted sound system, it was possible to look upon the Kiss phenomenon in a rather more benign and distant fashion than the four band members or their Kiss army of fans might like. What Kiss is a big, blousy, amiable cartoon, a sort of animated version of comic book superheroes. Even with their smoke, flames, spat blood, explosive charges, and levitating drum stands, they are still tied to the stiff format of the arena rock show, and, as such, their theatricality looks limited and lame. But they apparently fulfill a need, which is to present a safely sanitized image of the sort of glittery outrageousness that was so popular with the American heartland among the more vanguard bands 3 and 4 years ago. Kiss is a New York band, in that its members come from this area, but it's no surprise that the group won its initial popularity in the Midwest. Friday's concert and the one tomorrow night at the Nassau Coliseum are in a sense big-time homecomings, certifications of having made it. But of course nothing is so transitory as the early mid-teen idol, and with their confining format and musical limitations, Kiss looks particularly vulnerable to being swept aside by next year's Alice Cooper. That's not to say they can't conceivably evolve, both their theatrics and in their music. In both areas, they have shown an undeniable flair and even hints of a capacity for growth. But at the moment, it's a pretty shallow show, and surely their fans will catch on to that shallowness soon. The Record World Review. Kiss's Madison Square Garden debut was more like an indoor circus, doubling as a 4th of July celebration than a concert. From the moment the opening act went on stage, it was obvious that the youthful audience had come for one reason only. Between sets, Kiss fans paraded the garden carrying banners and sporting face makeup. A pair of Kiss Army recruits even took the trouble to dress in costumes fashioned after bassist Gene Simmons and guitarist Ace Frehley. Firecrackers, sparklers, and blinding flashbulbs were at the disposal of thousands of fans who became ecstatic the moment the house lights went out. In anticipation of a lull in the background, several minutes were allowed to pass between the time the members of KISS became visible on stage and the music began. What followed was one of the most threatening as well as enthusiastically received rock concerts in New York rock history. After all, New York is KISS's official barracks, and both audience and group were giving their all. KISS performed a large portion of their latest album, Rock and Roll Over, as well as a sampling of favorites from throughout their career. When the basic four-chord simplicity of their hard rock assault wasn't enough to be totally captivating, their theatrical antics more than compensated. Guitarist Ace Frehley's swift ascent up a series of steps to the top of a platform well over 10 feet high demonstrated that coordination and agility are as crucial to this band's performance as musicianship. Other visual highlights of the evening included Frehley's steaming guitar and Gene Simmons' bass solo accompanied by his blood-spitting act. Just what the climax of the evening was is hard to decide. For some it was the band's closing anthem, Rock and Roll All Night. Whether it's the theatrics, the music, or both, one thing is certain. The adventure of seeing KISS's bigger-than-life odyssey of comic book heroes as rock and roll marvels is truly unforgettable. The Aquarian Review. Other attractions are kids with flamethrowers and blowtorches, kids with the dry heaves, kids with snow up their nose and shit in their brains, kids throwing sparklers, replaced mostly by firecrackers when the show started, kids whipping frisbees and concert programs at other kids, Aim for the Neck, and kids wishing they'd brought an umbrella, me and Bystrek. The way things look right now, a riot is a foregone conclusion, and our lives are on the line for rock and roll. And then the show begins. Kiss Alive, Here Come the Bums Now. A big screen hangs above the stage so you can see every last badass grimace and tongue flicking. After the first few numbers, when the roar of the crowd has subsided to a shrieking din, I immediately seize upon the appropriateness of who's next playing earlier. Gene Simmons' specialty is the Townsend squat jump leaps while Paul Stanley majors in windmilling his axe into submission. As the show proceeds and the firecrackers and sparklers and such continue unabated, I keep turning up to the rafters and thinking, how sick are these kids? How drugged up and zapped out can they really be? Why don't they just set each other on fire and be done with it? Or maybe settle for trampling each other to death? The show, what there was to enjoy of it, was turned into an endurance test. Interminably boring guitar, bass and drum solos, rotten slipshod new songs, imbecilic repetitive stage patter, New York, we love you, delivered in Mick Jagger Queen's accents. It was all there for your displeasure. Most of these clowns ate it up though. This was the KISS Army after all, and on stage the generals were leading the attack. The whole place was a battle zone, and there was even bloodletting, courtesy of Gene Simmons with a darling set of blood capsules splitting apart in his mouth. His solo sounded like Godzilla in heat. Rock and Roll All Night was one of the few moments where the crowd got off on the art, and not the artifice. When they want to, KISS can play good rock and roll, but why bother with that when you can wallow in cheap flashy gimmickry and make millions off the rubes? The fire eating and fog blowing is fun, sure, but when the show revolves around the props and not the music, well, that's when the initial spark becomes a flash in the pan. In a final bit of hooery, Paul Stanley's guitar was smashed down to the clutching hands waiting to kill for a piece of the action. The crowd's bloodlust was boiling to the beat of the band. The final encore, Beth, was a slushy, fizzled-out finish to an allegedly dynamic show. We emerged unscathed. If KISS or one of their staff had bothered to make a pre-show announcement to the effect of no throw or no show, we might have been able to refrain from craning our necks around to spot potential attackers during each and every numbers, but that would have been a limp-wristed move in front of their tough-strut Neanderthal blitzkrieg image, now wouldn't it? KISS Alive? Kiss my ass. The National Enterprise Association Syndicated Review by Stanley Mises. While there must have been plenty of fireworks used to celebrate Chinese New Year, Year of the Serpent by the way, there was still enough to go around Madison Square Garden for the KISS concert held there last week. It was if Madison Square Garden had been converted into a temporary DMZ. KISS probably commands the youngest and most vociferous audience on the rock scene today. They react with total abandon to every one of KISS's stage gimmicks, and there are plenty of those. Start with the costumes and the makeup. By now, most everyone familiar with rock and roll has seen the bizarre get-up KISS favors, a kind of S&M comic book look. More than a few kids in the audience were similarly attired. How they ever got to the show from their house in silver and black makeup, chains and leather, and silver super platform boots is a trip to ponder. Then there are the Kiss trademarks. Gene Simmons' serpent-like tongue spends so much time out of his mouth in the course of a Kiss concert, perhaps it ought to get union-scale performers' pay all for itself. Not to mention the many fire torches, smoke bombs, simulated blood spitting, and fire-eating episodes that got the crowd a little crazier than they already were. Even Kiss's greatest detractors had to admit that their show was good, harmless fun. As one musical aesthete near us said, they can't do much, but they can't do much wrong either.